What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. This is our NFL Draft Grades AFC edition. I'm your host, Chris Raybon of the Action Network, and we're joined once again by longtime friend of the podcast, or as he likes to put it, ex-girlfriend of the podcast, but not angry ex-girlfriend, just a very amicable split ex-girlfriend, Matthew Friedman of Fantasy Life. Matt, great stuff on our NFC episode. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And I would say like the dynamic is like we dated in college. We were probably like better as friends than as like an actual couple. And then like we just kind of went our separate ways. You know, like you went to New York, I went to California, but we're like still friendly. And whenever we're in the same place, we hang each other and or we hang out and it's all good, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I do want to, because we on the NFC episode, we were trying to figure out, we were talking about the Niners, and we were trying to figure out who is their running back that they drafted that just nothing ever happened with. And I said Jay Williams, who doesn't exist. That's a basketball player, but I was on the right track. It's Joe Williams. So I just wanted to close that loop. But that was something we were trying to figure out on the last episode. We're going to dive into the AFC, go team by team here, and get Matthew's grades on those. Did a great job breaking down the NFC, so check that out if you haven't already. But before we dive in, just wanted to get your thoughts, Matt. Biggest surprise overall in the AFC, or any just big picture thought on the AFC and these teams in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, the AFC, I would say, thinking about the quarterback, like what was going to happen at number 3. Was it going to be Drake May? Was it going to be Jaden Daniels, who ended up falling out? And then, were the Raiders going to be able to get a quarterback at number 13? And so like quarterback, not as important for the AFC, just in terms of the players who were available, but like that was still going to be like hugely important for these teams, and then would dictate how a lot of the draft came after that. But, for the most part, you had the teams that have a history of doing intelligent things continuing to do those things. And then the teams that have a history of shooting themselves in the foot, continuing to injure themselves. So I think a lot went kind of according to how you would imagine it would for the AFC.
Who, who was it that now you make me think of shooting guys in the foot? You made me think, was it Stevie Johnson that did that celebration where he like pretended to shoot himself in the foot? Remember that Bills receiver after Plaxico? Yeah, I think it was Stevie Johnson.
I think that was Stevie Johnson.
He did it in a Jets game when Plax was on the Jets. Oh, man. But we'll get to the AFC East in a second. I know that was a good segue, but we're starting the South just like we did on the last pod with the NFC. And Jacksonville is a team that you have circled here that you really want to talk about. They started the draft with Brian Thomas Jr., a wideout at LSU. I can't knock teams for targeting these LSU wideouts given recent developments. But they're also another one of these teams, just like the Rams we talked about in the last pod, who, they seem to be really dialed in on a certain school, and that school was LSU. Their first 2 picks, they go Mason Smith out of LSU as well, and then get Jordan Jefferson, a DT out of LSU later in the draft. So the LSU Jags connection was strong. What did you think?
So I don't hate how some of this draft went for the Jags, but I'll just say like Trent Baalke, like this guy, look, sometimes people fart. Okay. All right.
Oh man, this gonna be a fun pod.
Not everyone drafts Trayvon Walker number 1 overall. You know what I mean? Like that is like a sign of like this guy overreaching, and he continued to do that in a lot of this draft. Now in round 1, I do like what he did, trading down from number 17 to number 23, picking up extra draft capital and still drafting Brian Thomas, who, some people mocked to the Jags at number 17. So I think like that was good process, good value, nothing wrong there. I will say though, like if you're going to pay Gabe Davis money in the offseason, I kind of don't know why you're drafting Brian Thomas now, because it's not as if they're like exactly like 1 for 1, but like they're sort of like both big bodied downfield type of receivers. Like there's a mistake somewhere in the process, but like on his own, Brian Thomas, first rounder, fine. After that, there were a lot of reaches in here, and they weren't like borderline reaches. This was like, you are routinely drafting this guy 30 spots higher than where you find him on consensus boards. And like, maybe sometimes you do that just because like positional value, positional scarcity, whatever it is. But if you do that routinely, pick after pick, draft after draft, like, that shows that you have a problem. And outside of what the Jags did in the first round, they revealed themselves just to have very little sense of positional value and like draft board consensus value throughout this process. So I like what they did in the first round. Don't like what they did after that. I would say this is a C plus.
Yeah, the way I look at it, with you mentioned Balky and the Jags, and the way I look at it is, you drafted Trevor Lawrence, a few years ago now, and since then, Houston has drafted their quarterback after you. Indianapolis has drafted their quarterback after you. I feel like all of those teams they have drawn even or even surpassed the Jaguars, and that shouldn't be the case because you already had your head start with your franchise quarterback, and that does speak to some of those whiffs in the draft, like a Walker. So yeah, I think I'm skeptical of this draft as well, because I just think the Jags should have been so far ahead of this division given the strength of it by now, but they're still kind of middling and fighting off the Texans and the Indianapolis Colts. Speaking of the Houston Texans, we talked on the last pod about, it worked out for them last year, making that trade back up to get Will Anderson at number 3 after getting Stroud at number 2. This year, nothing in the first round. They go to second and get Lassiter, the corner out of Georgia. I think that was a need pick. And then Blake Fisher, a tackle out of Notre Dame. They get him late in the second round, a tackle. Made some picks at positions of need early in the draft. What did you think of the Houston Texans draft? A lot of picks on day 3 for them.
Yeah, a lot of picks on day 3. Remember that they traded out of the first round, and so got an extra second rounder there, which they turned into Stephon Diggs. They also traded for Joe Mixon. I believe it was like a 6th, 7th round pick for Joe Mixon. So those guys kind of factor into this a little bit. I think, being able to get Stephon Diggs really just add some extra juice to what was already, I think, a really good wide receiver group anyway. And so thinking about Stephon Diggs as a part of this draft class, Kamari Lassiter, fine, like as a cornerback that you're adding in the second round. Before he really disappointed at the combine with his speed, there was hype of him as a potential first rounder. Blake Fisher, offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, like nothing wrong with him at all. So like, these are guys who maybe end up starting for them. But like, it's not a certainty that either of those guys will start for them. So like, it's an okay draft class considering you didn't have a first rounder, but like, you're not walking away with certain starters. I would say that this is a C.
Yeah, I will say though, I do like the coaching staff for Houston, and I feel like, they did draft a few defenders sprinkled through the draft. I feel like 1 or 2 of those guys, you're probably going to get more out of them than you thought coming into the draft, just because I think they're so well coached. They had a lot of guys last year that just played above their heads that you wouldn't have really, coming into the season, you wouldn't really guess. So excited to see, but I love Houston. I think I just love what Houston's been doing. And I think they're putting themselves in position to enter that AFC gauntlet with the Mahomeses and the Burrows and the of the world and the Josh Allen. So I do like what Houston's done in totality, and I do expect some of these more nondescript guys, at least 1 or 2 to pop.
I agree with that.
Yeah. All right. What about the Colts? So the Colts, last year, obviously they add what they hope to be their franchise quarterback in Anthony Richardson. This year, they're picking in the middle of the first. They get Latu, the edge out of UCLA. They get Adonai Mitchell, who fell in the second round. So a lot of people look at that and say that's a value. So I'm curious to what you think of Mitchell kind of sliding down to them in the second round and their draft in general.
I like it, but they didn't get a whole lot of starters. Like, they got Latu, And I think good value at getting him at number 15 as the first edge off of the board. And then Adonai Mitchell, who he will start for them, and he is probably better than Alec Pierce, but I would say like he's just kind of another version of Alec Pierce. Again, probably better, but kind of similar role that he will play within that offense. But then like after that, there are no guys that you can look at and say like, yeah, this guy has a really good chance of starting at some point. Like I think they did an okay job of addressing need. You know, in the third and fourth round, they hit the interior of the offensive line multiple times. In the fifth and sixth round, drafted 3 defensive backs. You know, like I think they did a decent job of saying, hey, this is a position of need. We're going to try to address it, not just once, because we might get it wrong. Like we're going to get multiple players that we like. So I think that's fine. And they didn't reach. And you know, Adonai Mitchell, they did get him at a place of value. So I feel like nothing really wrong with this draft, nothing great with it. I will give it a B.
All right. The Titans are the final team we got to talk about here in the AFC South. They start out with JC Latham at 7 overall, offensive tackle. You know, some people thought maybe they should have gone a different direction there. They get Tavondre Sweat out of Texas at a DT in the second round, and then no more picks until day 3. What did you think of Tennessee's draft?
I'm not that hot on it. Latham was a late riser in the
Yeah.
process. And so, you know, there's, you know, kind of some speculation like he wasn't as good as Joe Alt. Was he significantly better than the 3 or 4 offensive tackles who went after him? And I guess obviously the Titans thought yes. There was some speculation that maybe even the Chargers thought yes, but like I don't know if that's really the case. You know, like for a lot of the process, all of those guys were just in one big group together. So anytime you're the first team, like taking a guy at the very top of a tier, you're probably not maximizing value. And you know, you did that with the number 7 pick overall. So just in terms of process, probably not great. And then drafting Tavondre Sweat, again, in the second round there, you were kind of at the top of a defensive tackle run. And so again, I would say like you're not really maximizing value with that pick. And that doesn't even address like the issues of Sweat, where like there are weight concerns with him. Like, can he maintain his weight? And then like off the field concerns, he had a DUI not all that long ago. And there was the expectation that that would hurt him throughout the draft process. So like you reached for Sweat, not just that you took him as the top defensive tackle in this run, but on the consensus big boards, he wasn't expected to go nearly this high. So like, and I don't think Sweat is a bad player, but like there were just significant like concerns and like value concerns with him. And then you didn't have a third rounder. And I don't think anything you did on day 3 was really like moving the needle. So like I didn't write this up as like one of the losers in here, but
Mm-hmm.
like I do not like this draft. Like I like a couple of your players, but I don't really like the process. I feel like you could have gotten more. I'm gonna give this like a C minus.
Yeah, and Tennessee is a team, you know, just from a high level, have been kind of involved in some questionable process decisions. You know, going back to I feel like it was kind of a reactionary thing firing the GM after they get burned by AJ Brown last year, and then they let go of Vrabel, and I don't know, that seems like a curious choice as well. And you know, so who knows? Now the draft looks a little shaky, so we'll see what happens with Tennessee, but. They seem to be trending downward as a franchise compared to where they were, you know, a couple years ago. All right, let's jump to the AFC North. A lot of teams, I think, had good drafts in this one. Let's start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought their draft was pretty interesting. They, of course, go with Fatanu out of Washington in round 1, and then they keep addressing offensive line with Zach Frazier out of West Virginia in round 2, and Roman Wilson, a wideout out of Michigan. You know, always kind of raise my eyebrows when Pittsburgh takes a wide receiver, you know, on day 2 or early in day 3, because they seem to always find some good value there. So what did you think of the Steelers draft this year?
Yeah, I really liked it. I mean, drafts tend to be made on what you do in the first top 100 picks. And I think the Steelers really nailed it here. Troy Fautanu out of Washington, there was a possibility that he could have gone, number 14, number 16. I think getting him at 20, there's good value there. He adds great positional versatility. Some scouts were talking about how he was like a true 5 player, just like he could play all 5 positions across the board. And the biggest need entering the draft, looking at the offensive line for the Steelers, was at center. And there were some conversations that perhaps they had drafted Fautanu to be their starting center, and they said like, no, we think of him as a tackle. And then on day 2, they drafted Zach Frazier, who is one of the top centers in the class. So absolutely nailed it on retooling the offensive line and getting both of those guys at positions of value. And then Roman Wilson on day 3, they also got him falling down the board. And I think he's a perfect replacement for Deontay Johnson within that offense as a complement to Pickens. And then, for years, they have been looking for an off-ball linebacker, and Peyton Wilson has a ton of potential here. Injury concerns. The guy is missing an ACL, but you're getting him at pick 98. Like at that point, it's fine. The injury concern is baked in. And if you get 4 good years of this guy as your general in the middle of the defense there, then you can live with that, even if you don't sign him to a second contract. So absolutely love what they did with all 4 of those guys, them falling down the board. So potentially getting some value and definitely addressing positions of need. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't want to be like, this is an A+, but this is a solid A.
Is it enough to get the Steelers out of out of their perpetual purgatory? I guess that still probably depends on what happens with the quarterback situation. But
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
we've been it seems like every year they're in this purgatory, but they're always a little better than we expect. But this was a good draft for them. I totally agree. A more polarizing draft, I think, was the Cincinnati Bengals. I've seen grades all over the place for them. Some people liked it, some people didn't. You seem to like it. They start out with Georgia offensive tackle Marius Mims at 18 overall. They get Chris Jenkins, a DT out of Michigan, in the second round. Wide receiver Jermaine Burton out of Bama at 80th overall. McKinley Jackson, a big nose tackle at in the top 100 as well for them out of A&M. What did you think of the Bengals here?
All right. So I will say transparently that there were some reaches. If you're just kind of looking at where guys were drafted, where they were ranked on the consensus board, there are definitely some reaches. That said, I still do like what they did with their draft. Amarius Mims at number 18, like that generally fits the draft range. And like that dude is a mauler. Like he's probably not going to start for them right away, although there's a chance they could kick him inside to guard. But whenever he does start, like that guy is going to be a beast. He started only 8 games for Georgia. But like when he was on the field, he was absolutely dominant. So Trent Brown is signed for just a 1-year contract. Amarius Mims is a perfect guy who could just be there, your longtime right tackle on the corner, starting in the second year, and honestly, maybe as early as this year. And then Chris Jenkins, he had gotten some hype as a potential first rounder. I think getting him, to sort of mend what is a wounded interior of your defense on the line there. I think that's good value at 49 in the second round. Jermaine Burton, I like him as a guy who has the potential to play in the slot right away. Or maybe you're putting Jamar Chase in there a little bit more, but a guy who can be in 3 wide receiver sets right away and who can possibly be the number 2 if and when they lose T. Higgins in free agency next year. So I like getting him in the third round, a high upside player, and then also in the third round, going back to defensive tackle, kind of double dipping there with Chris Jenkins, just to really try to be sure to solidify that position. And then in the fourth round, getting Eric All. Like, I don't want to say there's any such thing as like a cheat code when you're drafting, but like, look, if there's an athletic tight end coming out of Iowa, maybe draft him. Like,
Right.
especially if you're not needing to do it in the top 100 picks, like maybe just draft him and see what happens. Like Iowa is a finishing school for tight ends who want to go into the NFL. Like these guys just come out as pros. So, big, athletic, has some yak potential. Like there's the possibility that Eric All turns into like the tight end that it feels like the Bengals have been searching for years to put next to Joe Burrow. So you put all of those guys together, and then, maybe there were some reaches here or there. And then I don't really think anything they did on like rounds 5 through 7 is that special, but I really do like that the players that they selected and how those guys will fit into their team. I like all of that for the Bengals. So, with the reaches, I can't give them an A, but this feels like an A minus.
Yeah, you can afford to do that a little more when you have, you have Joe Burrow, you have Jamar Chase. So you kind of have the core of your team set. So yeah, I didn't hate the Bengals draft either. The Ravens, every year it seems like we're talking about them having one of the best drafts. I think they got some good value, especially considering they're always drafting pretty late. They go with Nate Wiggins, the Clemson DB at 30th overall. They get Rosengarten at 62, tackle out of Washington. Isaac, linebacker out of Penn State, they get at number 93. So they seem to be getting some value and filling some needs. Deontay Walker at 113 out of North Carolina. What did you think of Baltimore's draft this year?
Yeah, the Rosengarten pick in the second round, absolutely loved, because this offseason, they lost both of their starting guards and they traded away their starting right tackle. So Rosengarten, coming out of Washington, he started on the left side and then kicked over to the right side when they got Penix. So he's got versatility in terms of like the line and the side that he can play on, but he's already got that experience playing right tackle. And there was some idea, like a little bit of hype of like Mel Kiper really liked him, like saying he could get into the first round. Like, I don't think that was ever going to happen, but Rosengarten in the second round, like he was the blindside protector to Penix on the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line last year. Like, as great as Fautanu was, Rosengarten was actually maybe the better offensive lineman for Washington last year. So getting him in the second round, I think, was outstanding value for them. And then Nate Wiggins, he fell down the board a little bit, so addressed a position of need at cornerback in the first round. And then Tez Walker, the wide receiver out of UNC, in the fourth round. A little bit of a divisive prospect, but, a ton of potential. And I mean, it's amazing. Even though the Ravens in the entirety of the Lamar Jackson era, like they've drafted one tight end in the first round, they've drafted 3 wide receivers in the first round, and they also drafted Mark Andrews. It feels like they still always need more pass catchers. So, adding Tez Walker in the fourth round, he has some potential there. So I like what they did. And then they just got a lot of these guys at value while still addressing positions of need. TJ Tampa at pick 130, the cornerback out of Iowa State, he fell down the board a lot. And so maybe that just means he's not as good as, Draftniks thought he would be, but, there's the possibility that, he fell too far and the Ravens are getting some value there. And I like it, again, doubling up on, Nate Wiggins, the first rounder that they had at corner, doubling up on that position, addressing a position of need, just sort of like classic Baltimore Ravens draft. I would give this an A.
Yeah, they don't reach. They tend to always get value, and they tend to still fill their positions of need as well. So yeah, I like the draft for Baltimore. Cleveland, I mean, they didn't, they were missing some picks still from that Deshaun Watson trade. So their first pick isn't till 54 overall. They get Michael Hall Jr., DT, out of Ohio State. Then they go, the other side of the rivalry, get Zach Zinter, guard out of Michigan, at 85th overall. And then they don't pick again until number 156. They go Jamari Thrash, the wideout out of Louisville. So what did you think of Cleveland's draft, keeping in mind that, some of the picks that they would have had were kind of sent away in that Watson deal?
Yeah. So, and they also traded for Jerry Jeudy as well.
Yep.
And so, that kind of gets taken into account. I don't really like the Jeudy trade. especially when they gave him the contract after that. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson trade, in retrospect, doesn't look like a winner. But, thinking about the players that they added now, I like defensive tackle Michael Hall out of Ohio State. He didn't get a lot of sack production, but he was really still good pressuring the quarterback. And so, just adding another big body there to the interior of a pretty stout defense already, I think was a good move. And then Zach Zinter, he has the potential to maybe eventually be a starter on that offensive line for them. But then, other than that, nothing really special that they did. I mean, this is like a C minus. I'm giving it a C minus because I'm going to take the Jerry Jeudy trade and signing and the Deshaun Watson trade into account here. This is a C minus.
Yeah, I mean their fate is going to be determined by ultimately, how if Watson can get back right. I think that then they're in great shape. If not so much. Let's go to the AFC East, and we'll start with the New England Patriots. They were picking number 3. They get Drake May, quarterback out of North Carolina. And then in the second round, they go wide receiver. Now, this is not the Belichick era anymore, so maybe they'll have better luck. But, Jalen Polk, that was kind of a polarizing pick. They do take Javon Baker out of UCF, another wideout later in the draft. And in between, they address offensive line. So their first 5 picks, all offense, which I think makes a lot of sense when you consider what their offense was doing these last few years. But what did you think of New England's draft, the first draft of the post-Belichick era?
Yeah, I think the Patriots are low-key losers. And I just want to start by saying, the Patriots are so incredibly lucky that they had the number 3 pick this year versus some other years, because they still at least had a shot of getting a really good quarterback prospect in this class. Other years, it'd be like, there are really only 2 quarterbacks the teams want, and we're not going to be able to get them. Like Drake May in another season, let's say he were in the draft next year, he could really easily be the number 1 overall pick. So getting Drake May at number 3, you lucked into that. Total home run in my opinion. So there's only so big of a loser that you can be given that situation. But you lucked into that. And then what you did with the rest of the draft, I don't want to say it was inexcusable, but you were routinely reaching at every pick. And so, yeah, you needed a wide receiver. It makes sense that you got one in the second round and fourth round, but you took Polk probably 20 to 30 spots too high. Yeah, you needed some help at tackle, at guard. Good thing you took 2 guys in the third and fourth round, but you took those guys higher than you needed to. And, I'd even say Florida State tight end Jaheim Bell. I love that pick in the 7th round, but I mean, we're talking about a guy who's at best your number 3 tight end at this point. Getting Joe Milton as a potential developmental quarterback behind Drake May, fine, the dude has an unreal arm, fine, whatever. But you got Drake May, and then you really kind of screwed up after that. So B minus.
All right. Yeah. I mean, it's tough, and it's a lot of it's just going to depend on Drake May and how he pans out. But it seemed like even after, they were kind of infamous, I should say, for kind of screwing up wide receiver picks in the Belichick era, and also just kind of random reaches on linemen. That was kind of the staple of the Belichick era. So it's funny that, in this first draft under a new regime, it kind of seemed like some of the same mistakes were being made. So that's kind of curious. But let's go to the New York Jets. They get Olu Fashanu out of Penn State, tackle in round 1. They get Malachi Corley, wideout out of Western Kentucky at number 65 overall. Those are their 2 picks in the top 100. They keep going offense. Braylon Allen are back out of Wisconsin. And then Florida State QB Jordan Travis at 171. Isaiah Davis, another running back out of South Dakota State. They go with him at number 173. So their top 5 picks were all offense. They do have a quarterback named Aaron Rodgers coming back So what did you think of this Jet draft?
The more I look at it, the more I just absolutely hate it. I mean, I like Olu Fashanu a lot. Like I like him a lot. Potential to be a long-term franchise left tackle, like 10 to 12 years as the blindside protector to a quarterback. So like I get it. Anytime you can take a player like that, you probably do it. And it's almost impossible to have too many offensive linemen.
Yeah,
So I entirely get it. But I will say you are all in this year on Aaron Rodgers. Like you have a very limited championship window here. You added left tackle Tyron Smith. You traded for right tackle Morgan Moses. You brought in left guard John Simpson. You have rebuilt the offensive line. Like, how many more bodies do you need to bring in to have a solid offensive line? Especially when, if you are all in this year, you want to maximize what you are getting out of that number 11 pick. And in a
yeah,
best case scenario, Fashanu doesn't play this year.
right.
Like in a best case scenario, Smith and Morgan Moses stay healthy and Fashanu just basically redshirts, or like maybe he flexes into guard if Elijah Vera Tucker isn't ready to go when the season starts. But like Fashanu isn't really a guard. Like he's a pure tackle. So like I understand that this is a position of potential need in that Smith and Morgan Moses are both like 33 years old. But it just feels like if you are bringing in both of those guys, you don't draft a tackle at number 11 overall. Maybe you draft one in the second or third round, but it feels like a lesser version of what the Falcons did in signing a quarterback and then drafting one at number 8. Like it just feels like understand you are in this championship window. You need to be getting more out of that investment than someone who, in a best case scenario, is on the bench for the entire year. And then after that, I really don't like what they did either. They don't have their second rounder. With their third rounder, they drafted wide receiver Malachi Corley, who sort of gets like Debo Samuel comps. Like he's not Debo Samuel. Like pretty much no one is Debo Samuel, but like Malachi Corley is more like Amari Rogers than like Debo Samuel. Like you can see it like stylistically. It's like, yes, that is the way that he plays, but I don't think he's going to fit all that well as the slot receiver within that offense, which means that like Alan Lazard is just going to end up kicking back into the slot. So you probably wasted a third rounder on a guy who's not going to be playing all that much. Like big picture, hey, do you think it's a good idea for us to put a wide receiver in the third round who can't really run routes with Aaron Rodgers? Like, no, that's probably not a good investment of a third round pick. And then you look at what they did after that. Braylon Allen, I really like Braylon Allen as like a super young, big guy who can truck, but you don't need to add a running back in the fourth round when you already have Breece Hall and Israel Abanikanda on your roster. You didn't need to do that. But if you did add a running back in the fourth round, you especially didn't need to add a running back in the fifth round with Isaiah Davis. Like, what are you doing? And then, by the way, you didn't need to add quarterback Jordan Travis to your roster in the fifth round. Like, what good are you going to get out of that? He is highly unlikely to become your franchise quarterback, like through development. And if Aaron Rodgers is injured, your team is already screwed, but still, you have Tyrod Taylor. Taylor is going to come in as your backup, not this guy that you were drafting in the fifth round. So it just feels like with everything they did in this draft, they did not understand the assignment, which was to build as much as you can for this very short championship window that you have. So, like, I liked some of the players they drafted if circumstances had been different, but man, like, you just did not hit what you needed to do here. So this is like a D plus for me.
Yeah, it's like they definitely went in on offense, which is what they needed to do, but it's like the way they did it, it doesn't really look like they drafted many guys who are going to actually move the needle this year for them. So yeah, it was kind of a curious draft. for the Jets. Let's go Buffalo here. So Buffalo ends up trading back out of the first round, and they grab a wideout in Keon Coleman with the first pick of the second round out of Florida State. Of course, they end up, giving a pick to the Chiefs that lets them go get Xavier Worthy. Then Buffalo does have a lot of picks on, day 2 and day 3, a lot of addressing the offensive line. The defense was addressed as well. They do get a running back in Ray Davis out of Kentucky at number 128. So what did you think, first of all, of the trade down out of the first round, how they ended up addressing the wide receiver position, and then just more their draft in general?
So I didn't hate the trade down. I know that there were some people who were like, you cannot trade, with the Chiefs, and especially when you know that they are coming up to get a wide receiver and you need a wide receiver. And I get that perspective, but if the Bills were not going to take Xavier Worthy, like, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, trade down, pick up some value, and then take the guy that you want whenever he's on the board, because there are still a lot of wide receivers available at that point in the draft. I don't hate the trade down. In fact, I'll say, like, I think it was a good move given the way that they were viewing those players. So I understand the process. Now, I will say Keon Coleman is not the player that I would have selected at the top of the second round there. Because people have talked about him even after they drafted him, of like, oh yeah, like he kind of fits as like a big bodied slot. And it's like, wait a minute, that is absolutely not what they need. Like, they already have Curtis Samuel. Like, that guy is the one who should probably be occupying the slot. And then they have Khalil Shakur, who, plays out wide, but really should probably be playing in the slot.
Yeah.
And then you've got Dalton Kincaid, who's a tight end, but is really just a big bodied slot. Like, the last thing they needed to do was draft a big bodied slot. So, like, I think Keon Coleman, they can talk about him as like maybe like an Anquan Bolden-esque type of middle of the field receiver, but like, that dude's going to have to play on the outside and he's going to have to win there. And like, I think he has the potential to do it. Like, he's a big bodied guy, good in contested catch situations. I don't really know how he is as a separator, and like, that kind of ends up mattering in the NFL. This is going to sound like a really negative comp, but like, Kelvin Benjamin, like a smaller Kelvin Benjamin, is kind of what he reminds me of. And remember, like, Kelvin Benjamin actually had like a decent rookie year before he got injured. And so like, maybe there's the possibility that Coleman is just like a really good, like, kind of like Mike Williams type, like downfield dominator at the catch point. Like, maybe that works. And so I don't have a big problem with it. I think there's just a question in terms of like how he ends up fitting with the offense. Utah safety Cole Bishop, he hits a position of need there. Defensive tackle DeJuan Carter also, like, hits a position of need. Ray Davis, I think, is a pretty good complementary back to James Cook. So I like that. And then, what they did after that on day 3, just a whole lot of bodies. Maybe some of those guys end up making a difference. But, Keon Coleman, like, I get the process of trading back. I think that was fine. I think it could have been a better fit. Like, I would have loved the idea of Adonai Mitchell as the guy that they drafted here instead of Keon Coleman. So like, I'll say that this is a B. There's some good things, some not so good things, but at least like, you didn't reach in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think that, that was fine. The value they got was fine. I think the one thing, my concern with this draft is for the Bills, you traded a guy in Stephon Diggs that was very core to what you were doing. Even if it, he had, maybe the end wasn't as great as you had hoped, but you come out of the draft with one wide receiver and that out of your 10 picks. And that was even, that's not even a slam dunk wide receiver pick in Coleman. So I do that's my concern with Buffalo and their draft. I know they didn't want to reach and, probably for the best, but, I did think they probably wanted to double up on wide receivers here just to, replacing Stephon Diggs is no small ask. And you're not only replacing Diggs, but, Gabe Davis, say what you want about him as a receiver, but he did make a bunch of big plays for you, and he was a great blocker. So there was a lot at wide receiver you were trying to replace for you to come out with just Coleman. So that's my kind of look at the Bills draft. And then we have the Miami Dolphins as the final team we'll talk about here in the AFC East. What did you think of Miami's draft this year? They are a team that didn't have a ton of picks early on. They go with Chop Robinson out of Penn State, number 21 overall linebacker. Then they go tackle Patrick Paul at number 55 overall out of Houston. And then they get Jalen Wright, who I think that's interesting. It's going to be fun out of Tennessee at 120 overall. So, Miami, not a ton of picks to show for it here, but what did you think?
I like this draft. Like the more I look at it, the more I do like it. Chop Robinson, I think they got him at a position of need with a little bit of value. Like he was going to go in the first round. And man, like they need some help on the edge, just in terms of like the guys that they have who are injured there. Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, like those guys are starters when they're healthy, but there are some health concerns there. I think Chop Robinson, along with Shaquille Barrett, forms like a really good rotational group there at the edge. So I liked that they got him, get good value. And then, they needed some help on offensive line. Patrick Paul, maybe like the last starter quality tackle in this class. And so like there's a chance that he actually does end up starting for them, maybe pushes Austin Jackson for the starting role. But I think he was a good pick there. And even if he doesn't end up starting right away, like he still gives them some depth at offensive line. Jalen Wright, really intriguing, big, fast guy, like fits very well within the Dolphins offense. And like, it is not hard to imagine like the plan of like, oh man, like Wright and Achane are just going to form like this dynamic, like 1-2 power punch there. So love that. You have to imagine that this probably means the end for Raheem Mostert, or maybe he has a reduced role, but love what they're doing with Jalen Wright there, even though like theoretically, do you need a running back? Probably not, but you're drafting one at pick 120. It's fine. Mo Kamara, I think is a good edge that they got with some value in the 5th round. And then I like Malik Washington, the receiver out of Virginia, who has a chance, I think, of pushing Braxton Berrios for the starting slot role there. And so, to have a potential guy who could start for you and getting him in the 6th round, and getting him at, I wouldn't say it's a massive position of need, but you would like to get more from your slot receiver. And then I would say getting him at value with him falling down the board. I think there's really good value there. So the Dolphins, I like a lot of what they did. B+. All
right, let's jump to the AFC West. Kansas City, I think, is the most interesting one. Xavier Worthy as a guy who, by no means a slam dunk pick at wide receiver out of Texas, but I do like, given where the Chiefs are at, they really did a great job rebuilding that defense. So they didn't, a lot of times in the past, it's felt like the Chiefs, needed to go defense early on because they had Mahomes and all those guys. But now it's a little different. So I like that Worthy, he's an outlier in terms of his speed, and you're pairing an outlier with another outlier at quarterback and at coach for that matter. So I like that, it's kind of a luxury pick, I think, for them. They did need a wide receiver, but I still think it was kind of a luxury pick, but I think one with a ton of upside. So I like that. And then, continuing to kind of address the offensive side of the ball, early on with Sua Matea and Jared Wiley, a tight end in the 4th round. What did you think of Kansas City's draft, especially the Worthy pick?
Yeah, I loved this draft. And, Worthy, I think you hit it right. Maybe it's a position that they didn't absolutely need to draft. And there can be some questions as to Xavier Worthy and exactly like how complete his skill set is, but like the dude is a blazer, and like I think he's actually a better receiver than he gets credit for. Like he actually was like a complete receiver for Texas, especially like in his early year there. Like he broke out as a freshman, like I think he's like an actual legit football player, not just a sprinter. And so putting him with Patrick Mahomes, like I think there's not the certainty, but there's the possibility that with Worthy, they kind of recapture some of the explosiveness that they had with Tyreek Hill. It's not to say that Worthy will be Tyreek Hill, but like he will just provide them some of the downfield passing attack that they definitely have missed the
And they
past
were
couple of
saying
years.
they were saying that their comp for him is actually not Tyreek Hill, but another guy Andy Reid had in his past, and that's Deshaun Jackson. And
Yes.
if he's like that, that's still a major upgrade, because if you think about what Marquez Valdez-Scantling was supposed to be, he was obviously not a Deshaun Jackson. He's a lot bigger than that, but he was supposed to be kind of that downfield guy that's going to get single coverage because you have Kelsey anyway. That's supposed to win deep, and he wasn't. He ended up not being that guy. Though he had a great, Super Bowl run and whatnot. But Xavier Worthy, if he's anywhere near like a Deshaun Jackson comp, that adds another element to that Chief offense.
Yeah, I love that comp, and I think it fits stylistically. And then also like Worthy is a smaller guy, like just physically, he is very similar to Deshaun Jackson as a prospect. And if you were looking at mock drafts, it was split between, are the Chiefs going to go wide receiver or are they going to go offensive tackle in round one? And the two guys who were regularly mocked to them, Xavier Worthy and Kingsley Suamataia. And so getting both of those guys, getting Worthy in round one, and then waiting and getting Suamataia in round two as your like potential, but I would say like very likely blindside protector for Patrick Mahomes. I think great process there, great value. And then getting Jared Wiley, the tight end out of TCU in the fourth round. Like he's probably not going to be the long-term successor to Travis Kelce, but like he's got a chance. Like he's a little bit Kelce-like just in terms of like the style of tight end that he is. So adding a guy who has a shot of learning under Kelce and then maybe eventually replacing him if Kelce retires in the next, like 1 to 3 years or something like that. I think there's some decent process there. And then, like whatever they did in the rest of like the 4th through 7th round, whatever. I mean, they added a couple more interior offensive linemen. I think that was probably a good process. And then added 2 defensive backs. Losing a defensive back this offseason, I think probably a good process there. But, those guys will probably just be depth pieces, but getting Worthy and Suamataia and then potentially the guy who's the number 2 tight end but behind Kelce now and maybe the successor, I do like that process. So A- for the Chiefs.
All right, let's talk about the Raiders now, because they stay put in round one, and they end up getting Bowers to fall for them, at tight end, but that wasn't really a position of need for them. And then they don't get a quarterback, so they go into the offseason with O'Connell and Minshew at the top there. So what did you think of this Raider draft and about the Bowers pick?
I mean, if I had told you that we were going to have 6 quarterbacks go off the board and the Raiders would somehow not be one of the teams to get one of those quarterbacks, like you would not believe me, right? It's almost unthinkable the way that the draft ended up playing out, and the Raiders are left there with Gardner Minshew as their presumed week 1 starting quarterback. And maybe they are fine with it. Maybe they theoretically are okay with this, but you have, and I'll just say, if ever there were a situation where Tom Brady comes back, this would be the team. Like go say to Tom Brady, hey, we've got Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. We've got these two tight ends in Brock Bowers and Mike Mayer that you might like throwing to. We just added a new center, and our defense looked really good at the end of last season. Like it feels like that is the only out. Otherwise, or like maybe Ryan Tannehill, but I don't think that's really an out. But like
Yeah, I think that's
otherwise, you're
over.
going with
Yeah.
Gardner Minshew, and it just sucks. And like Brock Bowers, I think he has a ton of upside, was awesome immediately as a freshman at Georgia. I like him a lot, et cetera, et cetera. That said, this feels like a terrible situation for him because this is
Yep.
going to be a slow, run heavy offense where you already have 2 wide receivers ahead of you, Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, who are probably going to dominate targets more than you. You're going to have to compete with Mike Mayer, who I thought was a really good tight end prospect last year and whom the team invested a 2nd round pick in. Like there's only so much playing time that you're going to get and only so many targets that you're going to get. And those targets coming from Minshew are going to be of pretty low quality. So even though I like Bowers, I felt like it's a terrible landing spot for him and like a terrible, I don't want to say a terrible pick by the Raiders, but like you definitely did not need to draft a tight end. This would have been maybe the last position I would have said you need on your team in the first round. So I think just kind of bad process there. Getting Jackson Powers Johnson, the center slash guard in the second round, I think that's fine. He potentially could have gone in the first round. So you're getting some value there. A decent chance that he ends up starting for you at right guard in week one. So like, I don't hate that. And then the other guys after that, just kind of like whatever their bodies. I do like Dylan Lobb as the running back that they got out of University of New Hampshire on day 3 in round 6. I think he actually has a really good chance of becoming the number 2 running back within that offense. Like Alexander Madison just feels like it has been and kind of like fairly duplicative with Zamir White in terms of skill set.
Yeah.
And then Dylan Lobb, I think at this point is an upgrade on Amir Abdullah as the pass catching back. So I do like Lobb as kind of like, especially like for fantasy, maybe like a dart throw, but then even like for the team, like I do not want to say he has like Austin Eckler potential or something like that, but like he could be like the small school guy who kind of starts out his career as like a committee receiving back and actually ends up kind of being more important to the team than they would have anticipated. So I like the value that they got with him there, but like other than that, I don't think that they really did a good job of addressing need and value. Like they didn't reach for a ton of players. So like I think at least that is good. Like they probably stayed true to their board, which is how you end up with Brock Bowers at number 13. Like they stayed true to their board. They didn't reach and they probably got some values here and there, especially with JPJ in the second round. But otherwise, like I don't think they did anything all that great. So and then I'll just say like big picture, you had to leave this draft with a quarterback
Yeah.
and not doing that, like that automatically like knocks you down a letter grade. So I'm going to say like, this is like a D plus.
Yeah. It hurts when, the Broncos get another team in your division gets a quarterback right before your pick too. So we'll talk about the Broncos in a second, but I do want to talk about the Chargers. They get Joe Alt at number 5 overall. They go with him instead of wide out like Malik Neighbors, but they do go wide out early second and get Lad McConkey out of Georgia. What did you think of the Chargers draft?
So I like what they did in terms of how they sequenced it. Getting Alt in the first round, coming back, getting a wide receiver in the second round, where like they could have done the opposite, where like you go with Malik Neighbors in round 1, but in the second round, you probably wouldn't have liked nearly as much the offensive tackle
Right.
that you were getting there. So I like the way that they sequenced it. And it is like very Jim Harbaugh to be like, we're getting a tackle, we're building through the trenches. And then I do like the receiver that they got in the second round and Lad McConkey. This is going to sound like such an insult, but it's not. Like what the Cardinals were hoping like Andy Isabella would be, like I feel like that is what Lad McConkey could be. Like he's fast, but he's not just like a slot receiver. Like he's not big, so like there are concerns about can he play on the outside, but because of his speed, I think he can play on the outside. And he was super productive on a per route and a per snap basis at Georgia. Like he didn't have a ton of playing time just because that's not the way that Georgia does it. But when he was on the field, he was productive. And then like just as a route technician, I feel like he fits really well with the quarterback that they have. And then after that, like they just addressed a whole lot of defense, multiple cornerbacks, linebacker, defensive tackle. I feel like that probably makes sense just given who they are and the needs that they have. So like, I don't like absolutely love the draft. But like, I feel like the way that they sequenced what they did in the first round, what they did in the second round, and then hitting defense after that, like they hit needs. So like, I would say this is like a B plus.
All right, let's finish up with the Denver Broncos. They go Bo Nix out of Oregon, quarterback at 12 overall. And then they also get Nix's wideout Troy Franklin early in the fourth round. In between, they only had one pick, Jonah Ellis, an edge out of Utah. What did you think? What do you think of Nix, and what did you think of the Broncos draft?
Nix felt like a really significant reach, but I mean, I understand that you have an offensive mastermind who wants his quarterback, but it just felt like, you don't need to take Bo Nix now when you can take him in the second round. Like or like trade down a little bit and pick him later in the first round. But anyway, picking Bo Nix at number 12, whatever, it is definitely a reach just in terms of like the consensus big board. But if there is one coach who maybe can really figure out, hey, this is how I want to use this particular type of quarterback, I do think it's Sean Payton. I will say it feels weird to me that a team with Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin and a team that doesn't have all that many draft picks is like, hey, you know what? We need another running back in the fifth round.
Right.
And so like, I like Audric Estime, the running back out of Notre Dame, but like, man, you did not need to draft him in the fifth round. They got good value in the fourth round with the Oregon wide receiver, Troy Franklin, but I will say like, there's a reason he was falling down the board. I don't know if you remember like Paul Richardson, like, like slender guy, like
Mm-hmm.
decent speed, but like he either needed to be just a little bit bigger or a little bit faster. Like
Right.
that is Troy Franklin. Like what he is now is a guy who is just not quite fast enough or not quite big enough. And I get that there's the idea of like the instant mind meld that he could have with Bo Nix, given that they're coming from the same program. But I just kind of don't see him being a high level player in the NFL. So reaching on Nix, Franklin is a value based on, where he was projected to go, but I think there are, concerns about his play style. Not getting positions of need later in the draft. I mean, I don't know, man, like a D.
Yeah, and a lot of it, once you reach on Nix, and then would you have taken Franklin if you didn't have Nix? So then that comes into play. Like you could be just kind of doubling down on a potential mistake there. So yeah, that was questionable. The only thing, they did. You think the Raiders take Nix at 13 if the Broncos don't
I don't think
take him at
so.
12?
I
Yeah,
think they were out on Nix. I think the only team that liked Nix was the Broncos. And it's funny. It is funny that you have Sean Payton like crowing after they draft Nix about how he tricked the Vikings into trading up one spot. It's like, well, man, like read the market. Like you tricked yourself into taking Bo Nix
right.
at number 12 when no one else was bidding against you for him.
Yeah, like you said, if there's any coach, Sean Payton would be it. But yeah, that's definitely a move. That's a questionable move, and they've already struck out once on trying to fix that quarterback position. So we'll see. But before we get out of here, who is your favorite draft for the AFC?
Man, I do like what the Chiefs were able to do with the top of their picks. But I will go with Pittsburgh. I do like the Fautanu and Frazier picks back to back, really solidifying the offensive line, and then Roman Wilson in the third round and adding Peyton Wilson in the third round as maybe the guy who can finally solidify the middle of their defense there. So I will go with the Steelers.
All right. Well, great stuff as always. And for everyone listening, be sure to check out our NFC episode, which is up already if you haven't yet. And you can be sure to check out everything Matthew's up to over at Fantasy Life. And you can follow Matthew Friedman at Matt F. The Oracle on Twitter. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Let's get this money.